Walk into any gym in America and you'll see the same thing. Rows of plastic tubes, neon-colored liquids, and athletes obsessed with macros, calculated by an app. We've been sold a version of functional strength that is entirely dependent on a global supply chain of synthetic powders and lab-grown isolates. But here's the problem. If your strength requires a chemistry set to maintain, is it actually functional? 1,000 years ago, Norse seafaring warriors were rowing open oceans, raiding fortified coastlines, and surviving sub-zero North Sea winters with a level of raw, explosive, and sustained power that would put most modern fitness influencers to shame. They didn't have anabolic windows. They didn't have pre-workout with 17 ingredients you can't pronounce. They had fuel, brutal, high-calorie, nutrient-dense fuel that modern nutrition has systematically diluted. Today, we're stripping away the $50 billion supplement industry to reconstruct the Viking Protocol. We're going to prove that real power doesn't come from a scoop. It comes from the dirt, the sea, and the fermentation barrel. This is the truth about why functional strength, as you know it, is a lie. In 2018, a team of researchers at Uppsala University in Sweden did something that changed how we look at history. They ran a massive nutritional and osteological analysis on skeletal remains from a Norse settlement dated to roughly 900 AD. What they found in the bone density and isotope markers stopped them cold. These weren't just big people. These skeletons showed signs of sustained, high-output physical performance that lasted their entire adult lives. In modern athletes, we see a peak and then a sharp decline. But these Norse warriors were showing professional-grade markers well into their later years. They had thicker cortical bone, the part of the bone that handles mechanical load, than almost any modern population. And they did it all without a single supplement. No whey isolate, no creatine monohydrate, just food. Dense, fermented, raw, unglamorous food that most people today would walk past in a farmer's market without a second look. Here is the reality check we all need. The global sports nutrition industry was worth over $50 billion in 2024. $50 billion. And yet, the people those Uppsala researchers were studying, the ones who rowed across open oceans in open boats, fueled all of that on rye, butter, and fermented fish. So we have to ask the hard question, have we actually made progress in human nutrition? Or have we just spent $50 billion a year solving a problem that we created ourselves? Both of those can't be true. The more I read the data, the more I realized the supplement industry isn't selling you strength. It's selling you a simulation of it. Have you ever actually looked at the ingredient list on a standard pre-workout powder? I mean, really looked at it. Most of them contain somewhere between 15 and 25 separate synthetic compounds. You've got anhydrous caffeine to spike your heart rate, beta-alanine to give you that tingle, so you think it's working, artificial sweeteners like sucralose that mess with your gut microbiome, and anti-caking agents just so the powder doesn't clump. Your body is an incredibly complex biological machine, and you're asking it to process all of that chemical noise before it even gets to the part that's supposed to help you perform. You bought it because a marketing campaign told you that real food wasn't enough. They convinced you that the gap between your current self and your peak performance is filled by a product with a skull and crossbones on the label. This feeling, this low-level anxiety that your nutrition is incomplete without a product, is by design. A 2022 analysis published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine reviewed the actual evidence base for the most commonly marketed sports supplements. The results: the majority had limited or inconsistent support for their performance claims. Let that sink in. We are spending billions on limited results while ignoring the whole food sources that have been feeding high-performance humans for 10,000 years. The industry didn't hide this data. They just made sure you were too busy looking at the proprietary blend to notice it. So, let's reconstruct the actual Viking ratio. We start with the rye. We aren't talking about that light, airy sandwich rye you find in a plastic bag at the supermarket. We're talking about stone-ground, dark, almost brick-heavy loaves. Research out of Lund University in Sweden, published in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition, tracked the blood glucose and insulin response of this specific kind of rye. It produced the lowest and flattest glucose curve of any grain tested, including oats. It has a high satiety response, meaning you stay full and your energy stays stable. When you're a Norse seafarer, rowing for 6 hours straight into a North Sea headwind, the last thing you want is a sugar spike and a crash. You need a slow, agonizingly steady release of fuel. Rye doesn't just give you energy, it manages your energy. It's the ultimate endurance carbohydrate that modern, fast-acting supplements try to replicate, but can never actually match. Then, there is the fermented fish. This is where most modern fitness fans check out. But this is the secret to their recovery. Herring and cod were preserved through a lacto-fermentation process. This wasn't just about preventing spoilage in a world without refrigerators. Fermentation is essentially pre-digestion. It breaks down the proteins into amino acids that your gut can absorb much more efficiently than a processed shake. A 2020 study from the Norwegian Institute of Food Research analyzed these traditionally fermented products and found that their amino acid absorption rates were roughly 20% higher than standard whey protein isolate, 20%, from a primitive preservation method. The fish fed them twice, once as a direct hit of bioavailable protein and once as a probiotic delivery system that kept their immune systems ironclad in the harshest conditions on Earth. Now we have to talk about the raw butter. This is the part that usually scares the low-fat fitness crowd. Norse crews were consuming massive amounts of high-fat dairy from grass-fed animals. In a cold climate, under sustained physical load, dietary fat is the most calorie-dense fuel available. Gram for gram, fat carries more than twice the energy of carbohydrates. But this wasn't modern, grain-fed, pasteurized dairy. This was raw, cold climate butter packed with fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, and specifically K2. Vitamin K2 is the traffic cop for calcium. It makes sure that the calcium goes to your bones for density and not your arteries. The Vikings weren't eating butter because they liked the taste. They were eating it because it was a slow-burning nuclear reactor for the human body. It gave them a steady, high-wattage burn that didn't crash when the sun went down. This is where functional strength becomes a reality. If your gut is fat-adapted, meaning it knows how to burn stored and dietary fat for fuel, you don't bonk. You don't run out of gas. Modern fitness culture has made us carb-dependent, meaning we're constantly chasing the next sugar hit to keep our energy up. The Norse warrior was the opposite. He was metabolically flexible. He could burn the rye when he needed a burst, and he could burn the butter and his own body fat for the long, cold haul. That is real functional strength. I want to be clear, some modern supplements for work. We know creatine monohydrate has a mountain of evidence behind it. But we aren't talking about a single supplement. We're talking about an entire industry that convinced the average person that whole food is insufficient. They convinced us that we are primitive without their products. But the skeletal records don't lie. The isotope analyzers don't lie. The fermentation research doesn't lie. We replaced nutrient-dense, slow-processed whole foods with fast, convenient, synthetic alternatives, and then we spent decades and billions of dollars trying to patch the gaps that those replacements created. That tightness in your chest when you realize the solution might have been simpler and cheaper than what you've been buying? That's not nostalgia. That's your body admitting a biological truth. But here's the good news. The tide is turning. Right now, sports dietitians at several Scandinavian national athletics programs are rebuilding their protocols around these ancestral foods. They're moving elite athletes away from the powder-only diet and back to fermented proteins and high-fat grass-fed dairy. Not because it's a trend, but because the data shows it works better for long-term health and recovery. A small but growing number of strength coaches in the US and Europe are dropping the supplement dependency and seeing their athletes hit PRs they couldn't reach on the neon liquid diet. So I'm leaving you with a question that the $50 billion industry doesn't want you to ask. If the fuel was never the problem, what exactly have we been paying for? Is your functional strength something you actually own, or is it just something you're renting from a supplement company, one scoop at a time? We're going to continue this series by actually making these rations, fermenting the fish, churning the butter, and testing the physical output. We're going to reclaim the raw power that modern nutrition has systematically diluted. Because at the end of the day, strength isn't about the label on the tube. It's about the density of the bone, the efficiency of the gut, and the resilience of the spirit. Drop a comment below. Are you ready to ditch the lab and go back to the land? What's the one supplement you're terrified to give up? Let's have a real conversation about it. Subscribe if you're ready to stop the simulation and start the protocol. I'll see you in the next one.